arguments break out. And you've got a certain number of turns to solve these problems before you need to sleep again and the next day starts up. So your goal is going to be to not only survive, but also keep as many townspeople alive for as long as possible. So, I killed a lot of time with that kata, so I'm going to jump right into it. Let's see. So I commented out some stuff just so we can kind of see what we built before. Before we had the ability to create players. So if I wanted to create a player like Gary, I could hit the player factory and then have Gary do things. I can get his name, I can have him heal, I can have him negotiate, I can have him repair. There's a little API built in here. But we're rapidly getting to the point where we need to start building our game properly. We could spend from now until next year building in more and more functionality for these game objects. So, inside of my environment, I've got a map, which is just a grid, and every sheet is going to be a string array. And so the grid's going to be, so room 1-1, right, is going to be the first column, first row. That's going to be a room. And then when we design our maps, we can build some other tools, we can do whatever we like, but it's going to be based off of these sheets. So very old school, very, very dungeony, and kind of paying homage to that. Then we've got our rooms, which consist of a room key, which is just an XY coordinate, and then room content, which is going to be hooked to a room key. It's going to have a title, a description, and it's going to have players, monsters, NPCs, and items. Yeah, man, Mystical Poker, they're all out there on, all the videos are out there on YouTube. Some of the quality's better than others. All the more reason why I want to kind of go back after a few weeks and redo the katas and make them very short kind of videos. But they're out there and you can check them out, and the code's all out there too. Okay, so the first thing that we look at is, if I create a world, and inside of that world there are, let's say, 10,000 objects. I might do something like this. I might say, well, let me just say world is equal to a new list of iGame objects. And then I say that I create a new player named Gary, as we did before. And I add Gary to that world. I can do this because Gary is of type iGame object. Just like everything in C# is an object, we decided that everything in our world derives from iGame object. So, Gary's in my world. Let's say that I wanted to var foo is equal to world dot first. So, and let's go ahead and move this down so it's a little clearer. And I said, now I know that Gary is the only thing in this list, so when I call first, I'll get Gary back. But as far as foo is concerned, all foo is an iGame object. So then I say, hey foo, why don't you take damage? Why don't you take damage of 20? So this is actually, it's a simple example, but there's some pretty neat stuff happening here. So let's say that I console.writeLine Gary.hitpoints. And then after I tell Foo to take 20 damage, I console.writeLine Gary's hit points again. Okay, and I'll read key, and I'll play that. Alright, so my first output is 1335. My second output is 1315, which is weird. You might think it's weird at first because I put Gary in the list. I got an iGame object out called Foo, and I told Foo to take 20 damage, and it took it away from my Gary. And the reason why that is because both my variable Gary and the entry into my iGame object list are pointing at the same thing, right? So the thing inside of my list is just a reference. It's super important when we want to start building out our world and we need to start accessing things. And we start doing our commands. We know that everything in the game is an iGame object. So that's our lowest common denominator. So we can add everything to a list of game objects or a dictionary, and we can operate on them as we'd like. It's going to make everything else much simpler. And we can ignore all the underpinning stuff because we don't care about it. We're going to pass in a request to do a command. It's going to find the object in our game object list. It's going to apply that, it's going to execute that command. And then the next time we go and ask Gary what his health is, even if something else someplace else in the game affected it, when we ask Gary, he's going to return back that kind of universal value of his health. So requisite of all the actions that were applied to it. Okay, so that's the example of reference and how we're going to start building our world, and how we don't have to worry about keeping track of where everything is. We just know it's inside of a list, and we can pull from that list and apply changes. Okay, so let's go back into our room content. So it also means that we might not need to have all of these separate lists for players, monsters, NPCs, and items. For any room, we might just be able to do a public list of iGame object and say that it is the, we'll just say content for lack of a better, or yeah, just game objects. There we go. So we might be able to get away with this. And then we'll leave it up to the render. So what we're going to hopefully do is, if you're in room 13-2, right? Then we'll look up what's in that room, and we'll render, we'll cast all the objects of type item, and we'll put them on the floor. And we'll find all the game objects of type player, and we'll bring them into the room with you. We'll find all the monsters, and we'll bring them in as well. So we're going to start exploring this idea of rendering. But we don't want to carry the full object information with us in memory. We just want to create this very simple iGame object, and then when we need it, we can go ahead and render it. So we won't see quite the same performance benefits you would like in a full-on graphics game, but it's good to keep this in mind, right? As light as possible for as long as possible, and then when it's time to render, that's when we'll do some heavy lifting. Okay, so let's go back over to our program. I thought I was going to run out of some time, so I went ahead and just coded up a few things. So let's go ahead and uncomment that. So I'm going to say that a world is a new grid. The rooms are going to be a new dictionary of room keys and content, and the sheet's going to be, 10 by whatever. I'm going to create a new room key, which is going to have the coordinates of 1, 1. So very first room on the grid. And previously I was calling new player, new monster, new NPC, new blah blah blah. Don't need that anymore. And so we're already seeing the benefits of slimming things down. So new option equals new list of game objects. Let's create a room. So we're going to define our room as being, give me the room that's located at this room key. So room key of 1, 1, which I just created here. So I'm just pulling the reference for that room. I'm saying the title of that room is going to be test chamber. And the description for that room is going to be, this room is white with ripples of color rising up from a gray floor to form walls. When you focus on the color, it seems to fade. You think you hear voices coming from the other side of the opaque walls, but can't be certain. Right? So very Dungeons and Dragons-y. I'm no writer, but we're making a world, and it's just really exciting, right? Anytime you can kind of craft, especially stuff from text. And again, I was a huge Major Mud and BBS guy, so this is all just an homage to that. Okay, so previously I would have said room.players, but now that I did my little refactor, Mystical Puka, yeah, man, yeah, that's what. So Mystical Puka has a stream where he's building out a loot generator. And I'm telling you, when I saw it, I was like, I could use that, right? I need some ideas for loot in my game. When's that going to be open sourced? Okay. So, let's go ahead and just add a bunch of game objects. And this is just proving the point that we don't care what they are. As we saw from the command pattern, once we're interacting with the API at this level, we really can abstract ourselves away from the implementation to the point where we just isn't terribly important to us what these things are. Okay, so I've added a bunch of things to my game objects. So my room has all these game objects in it. And I still have a reference to room. So let's go ahead and seed it out a few more item adds. So, if I wanted to get Gary out, I would have to go into game objects, dot where, I'm doing a lambda expression. And the first, I can get it by the name, because all our game objects have names. So I can say name equals Gary. And I can pull it that way. And things do this. Things use this mechanism, which is why names have to be unique. But there are more efficient ways to do it. We're running out of time slowly, but I do want to implement the commands that we talked about. So that's a quick this is how we've opened up the ability and opened up the need to have commands. So if we go back to our iGame object, so everything in the game can take damage and restore health. We might not need to expand that, but what we want to do first is add a new class and just call